We're live.
Okay, awesome. We have a Black Lives Matter debate. We might branch off into some other topics regarding economics and stuff of the work. Just going to kind of go with the flow a little bit, see where it goes. We have two progressives over here arguing on the side of Black Lives Matter. If you guys would like to introduce yourself and then kind of go into your opening statement, go ahead. I'm not going to be like timing you or anything as long as you don't go absurdly long.
Cool. Well, my name's Trey, and I represent We the Resistance page.
And I'm Patrick the Progressive. I represent Burning Media Network. And, Trey, you want to introduce yourself first, and I'll go in after you?
Sure. So you want me to just do my introduction right now? Is that what you guys want to do?
Yeah, go ahead and give your opening kind of position, establish what you believe.
Okay. All right. So basically, I was looking at, why is there a Black Lives Matter movement? And I was going through the data, and even though we can't even get the full data because the police don't release every single killing and they don't put that, we have to go through newspaper clippings. It seems like we could find about 1,000 citizens annually are killed by police. And we found about a third of these were fleeing from the police, actually. So as we know, Black people, they make up about 12 to 13% of the population. But out of these 963 to 1,000 killings a year, despite being 12, 13% of the population, they're making up 25% of the cop fatalities. So an unarmed Black person is 5 times more likely to get shot by police than a white person, according to a few studies. I've seen a study that said 3 times. It seems to be ranging 3 to 5 times. And when you consider Black teenagers, that number is 21 times more likely to be shot by police than their white counterparts. Now, some of these people will say that that's because Black people are more likely to be stopped by police, and they do have a higher rate of being stopped and arrested than any other population. And I believe Hispanics and Native Americans rank in second and third for that. Now, it appears that I was looking at a psychology study done by the American Psychological Association, and they found that people in general, but police officers as well, they tend to see Black men as larger and more threatening than a same-size white man. And this actually isn't exclusive to white people, Asian, or Mexicans. They found that Black people also see other Black men as larger and more, but they don't see them as more threatening. That's the difference between Black view of a Black person and everybody else's view of a Black individual. Now, in our criminal justice system, Black suspects are definitely more likely to be shot wrongfully. So out of the 1,000 deaths per year that we see from police shootings, since 2015, if you do about 1,000 roughly, that's about 11,000 citizens that have died at the hands of cops from 2005. And that's typically 1/4 Black. So when you take 1/4 Black out of 11,000 individuals who have been killed, that puts that number at about approximately 2,700, 2,750. Now, since 2005, it was 77 cops have been charged with murder or manslaughter since 2005. But only 26 were actually convicted. So 26 convictions out of about 11,000 deaths. That puts, a rate. Let's see, I have it written down right here. So a cop has a 99.993% chance of not being charged and a 99.998 chance of not being indicted. This is what they're seeing. They're seeing that cops, like the one that killed Philando Castile, all they have to say is, I smelled marijuana or I feared for my life, and that's it. They wash their hands of it. And we had that cop in Oklahoma that killed, was it Terrence Crutcher? Had the hands up. We have no indictment or no charge, conviction, excuse me. But, I often hear that cops are more prone to use physical force with a Black person because Black people are more likely to commit crimes. And the number I hear often is, the 13% of the population, but they commit half the murders in the country. And I just want to break down why that statistic is misleading. And the reason why it's misleading is because this is regarding convictions and doesn't include the thousands of murders that go unsolved every year. So we have, thousands of murders that go unsolved, and we have convictions. And we know from data that Black people are more likely to be convicted. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that this is a racist criminal justice system. I think it could be doing part to that, maybe, some unconscious bias or some prejudices in the criminal justice system from jurors or from judges. But what we've also found by looking back and, things with DNA since 1954 to present, we've seen that Black people are 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted of a crime. So they're wrongfully convicted much more often than any other person. Now, I understand that police have a hard job to do. 48 cops have been killed annually, and that's obviously 48 too many. But in all seriousness, police officers have volunteered for this job. They are going out there. They know this is a tough job, and I know it's difficult for them, and I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. I really wouldn't. I don't believe the same gene that makes up your eye color makes up your pigmentation. And I don't believe that is indicative of somebody committing a crime, somebody being more prone. I believe that has to do more with their environment, their economic situation. And what we've also found was that when you study after study, when you analyze the data from the criminal justice system, Black people are incredibly arrested and sentenced to longer prison terms than their white counterparts. And the biggest, I guess, area to look at would be drug consumption. And when you're looking at drug consumption, looking at the war on drugs to begin with. And we now know from Nixon's top aide that they began the war on drugs to basically undermine what they said were hippie liberals and Black people that were basically being the opponent of the Republican Party at the time for Nixon. And they wanted to use the war on drugs as a way to undermine their credibility. And it largely had to do with marijuana. But we obviously know that Blacks and whites consume marijuana at the same rate. And Black people are 4 times more likely to be arrested for that crime. Get crime at all. But in regards to all drugs, we have every single drug out there, illicit substance, that puts white people at about 2.5 times more likely to consume any drug. But we have Black citizens wind up going to prison at a rate of 6 times more. And I also think this has to do with the access to legal defense. So I think that obviously we see, the average income for households for whites versus Blacks. There's a big difference in unemployment rates versus, employment in their salaries. And the public defender system, obviously, in my opinion, plays a role. I mean, we look at, wage discrimination, and we see that study after study shows about Black people having wages from about 70 to 80% of what their white counterparts are. And I believe that Black Lives Matter, they see this discrimination going on. They see the discrimination going on in the police brutality. We see it time and time again, with Eric Garner. In the case of Mike Brown, which kind of sparked this, at least, there was conflicting reports of how he was behaving. Some people said hands up. Some people said he was attacking. some coroner said he was, fighting. And so there was conflicting reports. So I'm kind of going to stay away from Mike Brown. But I don't see why people have a problem with Black Lives Matter. As we saw, there was the Dallas shooting. And I think too often we will take one instance of what somebody does. And remember, this individual was blacklisted from several, Black Alliance groups.
Yeah, and
so he wasn't.
Sorry.
Yeah, he was. No, you're good. He wasn't directly aligned.
Yeah.
With Black Lives Matter. They had condemned him long before that took place, and so I think we have to be careful about undermining someone's message on the actions of a few, and not overgeneralizing too much with that.
Okay, cool. So is that your guys' opening position?
Sure, that would be mine.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. I'll go ahead and get into our side. So I guess we'll kind of almost go a little backwards there. You mentioned some stuff that I kind of want to go through. I took some notes here, but I'll get there when I get there.
Sure.
And one of the things I wanted to bring up was it's pretty easy to kind of condemn a lot of the acts committed by Black Lives Matter. Even if they're not officially recognized as members, it's still more the motivation in the name of, which is concerning. When the 18-year-old was tortured for 2 days straight, or when they block highways, or call for the death of white people, or call for burning their city to the ground, it's very easy to say that doesn't represent Black Lives Matter, and that would be the end of it. And I would assume you would be against that. I would give you the benefit of the doubt that you also condemn those acts and that were committed in the name of those organizations. But I really asked the question of why were these acts committed in the first place? And I came to the conclusion that when you spread misinformation, propaganda, and you spew it, you can have a lot of messed up things happen. And I'll use Patrick's Instagram, for example, just as I kind of go through. You did post a picture and you said you have the right to bear arms unless you're a black man, then put America KKK in your captions. And I wanted to look at bipartisan facts and see if it adds up. So you really wouldn't know this from the activists, but police shootings are responsible for a lower percentage of Black homicide deaths than white and Hispanic homicide deaths. 12% of all white and Hispanics who die of homicides are killed by the police, compared to only 4% of Black homicide victims. And you could argue that's driven mostly due to Black on Black crime being so bad. You mentioned earlier that the reason for that is because that's only known. That's true, but we really shouldn't base our knowledge off of what we don't know. We don't know who did it. You could just as easily spin it around the other way and say, well, it could actually be higher. Obviously, I wouldn't present the argument, but I don't know if it's a really good refutation. Here it says more Blacks die each year from homicides, more than 6,000, than homicide victims of all other races combined. Their killers aren't police. They're not white. They're other Blacks. And in Chicago last year, 2,870 people, mostly Black, were shot. As for officers and what they do, gun-related murders of officers are up 52% through this year and last year compared to the year prior. You posted that people block the roads to show us what it's like to be harassed by police. You also said it's safer to be a white criminal than an innocent Black person. And I wanted to see if that is completely accurate. In 2014, the police shot 990 people. The vast majority were armed or violently resisting arrest, according to the Washington Post database of fatal police shootings. Whites made up 50% of the victims. Blacks made up 26%. That proportion of Black victim is lower than what the Black violent crime rate would predict. Blacks are about 62% of all robbery defendants in America, 70 in the 75 largest counties, 57% of all murder defendants, and 45% of all assault defendants, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, even though they only comprise about 15% of the population in those particular counties. In New York City, where Blacks were 23% of the city's populations, Blacks committed 3/4 of all shootings and 70% of all robberies, according to the New York Police Department reports. Whites committed less than 2% of all shootings and 4% of all robberies, though they're nearly 34% of the city's population. In Chicago, 80% of all known and unknown murderers were Black, though they're less than a third of the population. Whites made up 0.9% of all known murder suspects in Chicago in 2015, and 1.4% of all known non-fatal shooting suspects. although they're about a third of the city's residents. And when you mention like how critics of police, and one of the questions you can pose to them is, how do you want non-biased police data to look like when you have such differences in the rate of crime? Blacks commit homicides at 8 times the rate of whites and Hispanics combined. You mentioned Black youth. Black males between the ages of 14 and 17 commit homicides at nearly 10 times the rate of whites and Hispanic male teens combined. I'm not saying all Black people are bad or that we should treat them as such, but if that's the area where the crime is being committed, then from a pure empirical and data point of view, that's where we should patrol. You mentioned a lot of studies. I have a few too. I have a Harvard study that looked over 1,332 police shootings between the time period of 2000 and 2015. And Blacks are actually 20% less likely to be shot by police than whites, despite the fact that they're both about as likely to carry a weapon. I have another study by Johns College of Criminal Justice, which was done by the assistant professor Peter Moscow, who determined that when homicide rates are adjusted, whites are 1.7 times more likely than Blacks to die at the hands of police. Adjusting for the racial disparity at which police are fiercely killed, whites are 1.3 times more likely than Blacks to die at the hands of police, end quote. I also have another study here by Washington State University, which took 80 police officers, most of whom were white, from the Spokane Police Department and put them in over 1,500 simulated scenarios involving both armed and unarmed suspects who were both Black and white. The researchers concluded that officers were 3 times less likely to fire on an unarmed Black man than an unarmed white man. The investigator, Lois James from Washington State University, hypothesized that officers were essentially second-guessing themselves when they were confronting a Black suspect due to their awareness of the potential negative repercussions of shooting a Black citizen. James' work was also backed up by a paper from Harvard's Royland Fryer, who found police officers in Houston were nearly 24% less likely to shoot Black men than white. And data comprised from officer shootings in Dallas, Austin, Houston, Los Angeles, and 6 Florida counties, he found that officers were 47% less likely to discharge their weapons without first being attacked if the suspect was Black than if the suspect was white, and that the Black and white victims of police shootings were equally likely to have been armed. Overall, he found no evidence of racial discrimination in shooting. I also have an analyst of police use of force by the Center of Police Equity, and they concluded, consistent with all these other studies done by these great universities, that whites were actually disadvantaged compared to Blacks when it comes to lethal force. Officer use of lethal force following an arrest for a violent felony was over twice the rate for white arrestees than for Black arrestees. As for like the kind of, I hate to call it cherry-picked examples, but just kind of examples you can pick from the media, I get that, and I wouldn't accept that over like peer-reviewed studies, but I do have a few also kind of cherry-picked examples I could also bring out. Among the 500 white victims of fatal police shootings last year, there was a 50-year-old suspect in Alabama who ran out of his house with a spoon and got shot by police. There's a 28-year-old who came out of the car with his hands up after a chase. He was shot and killed. A 21-year-old suspect in a grocery store who was wanted for robbery in Arkin, Ohio. He escaped on a bike, and because he did not remove his hands from his waistband when he was ordered to do so, he was shot. Had any of those victims been Black, police critics would have been completely on them over that. But instead, they remain unknown. And I'm not justifying these people at all. One of them was a robber. The other dude had a long criminal history, so it's not like I'm defending them. But in terms of the argument of Black Lives Matter and their stance on policing, I think it's something to take note of. Another one, you said that cops were a bunch of cowards. But if you actually look at fatal police shootings, they're actually pretty rare no matter what race you are. Police have about 385 million contact with civilians every year. In 2014, they made over 11 million arrests. But according to data collected by the FBI from about 2/3 of the largest police departments, officers were assaulted more than 48,000 times. Deadly assaults against officers in those same departments occurred 27 times a day. Only 0.009% of all arrests ended with a civilian death. And for every 10 deadly weapon assaults on a police officer, there is only at the most 1 fatal police shooting. Police officers are more likely to be killed by a Black person than vice versa. Over the past decade, blacks comprised 40% of all cop killers, though they're only about 6% of the average population of this time period. That means an officer is 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a black male than an unarmed black male is to be killed by police. If you also look at broken window policing, which a lot of people have deemed as racist, a lot of Black Lives Matter activists that come out against it, well, they kind of got what they wanted last year, and it hasn't really worked out very well. Particularly if you look at high crime areas, a lot of minority communities were pretty much devastated. Violent crime was rising in cities with predominantly large black populations. Homicide rates in 2015 rose anywhere from 54% in Washington, D.C. to 90% in Cleveland, Ohio. And the nation's 56 largest cities, homicide rose 17% in 2015, which is an unprecedented one-year spike. Through the first half of 2016, homicide in 51 largest cities were up another 15% compared to the year prior. In Cleveland, you had 3 children ages 5 and younger that were killed in September alone of last year. 5 children were shot in Cleveland over a 2015 July 4th weekend. A 7-year-old boy was killed in Chicago the same weekend by a bullet that was intended for his father. In November, a 9-year-old in Chicago was lured into an alley and killed by his father's gang enemies. The father of the murdered 9-year-old refused to cooperate with the police in identifying his son's killer. In August 2016, a 9-year-old girl was doing her homework on her mother's bed in Ferguson when gunfire ripped through her house and killed her. In Cincinnati in July 2015, a 4-year-old girl was shot in the head, and a 6-year-old girl was left paralyzed and partially blind from 2 separate drive-by shootings. A 6-year-old boy was killed in a drive-by shooting in West Florent Avenue in March in St. Louis. 10 children under the age of 10 were killed in Baltimore in 2015 alone. In Chicago alone, at least 15 children under the age of 12 have been shot in the first 7 months of 2016, including a 3-year-old boy who is now paralyzed for life following a Father's Day drive-by shooting. So just to kind of clarify my position, I think ultimately Black Lives Matter, there's a lot of misinformation that would be spread about it. I think you do see a lot of kind of the hate from Black Lives Matter, and then also some unintended consequences, which hasn't particularly helped black communities. It's actually only caused violence to rise. And I think we should kind of base reality off of kind of what we know. So Isaiah, do you want to add anything to that, or?
I didn't really got anything prepared, but I'll just kind of like sum up my position like in brief.
Sure.
A lot of right wingers default to the perspective that if BLM wasn't rioting moderately, like frequently, not so much anymore, but within the past few years, definitely back the movement. But I don't really care. Well, I do care if they're rioting, but even if they weren't, their message is still inherently flawed. It's very inaccurate. And I don't think we should be using a subjective conjecture and what ifs to kind of determine these sort of shootings and jumping automatically to race as the number one factor. And also trying to use black kids as political pawns for an agenda is pretty disgusting, to be honest. I mean, you didn't really care about these. A lot of them ended up shot in the streets and in the grave. They didn't matter beforehand.
I mean, up in Chicago, people like there's often that thing. Like I know you mentioned the black on black violence earlier. So like, and most of the time, you know, they're saying the attitude is, well, why are you marching like for the people killed by police and not by the people killed within your community by, you know, gang members and gang violence, you know? So, and it acts like they just don't see all these mothers and fathers that do march through their own neighborhoods, but you can't change the mentality of a gang. That's like trying to sit down with the mafia and, you know, you're going to tell them, hey, stop nixing people, but it's not going to work. It's just, you got to try and talk to the leaders of each community to get that done with the black on black violence, so to say.
Well, when you bring up the black on black violence in the gang, the natural enemy of the gang members would be the police. And in that sense, you need cooperation between the leaders and the police officers. And that's a big, big issue when you look at Black Lives Matter and kind of, for example, they had a protest, I forgot where, but I can't remember the chant. It was something about roasting pigs, which obviously they were referencing cops. The thing is, like, you need cops there if you want to do that. And with the black on black crime, it is true that you're more likely to die from someone of your own race. Obviously, you're more likely to be around them. But with the black on black crime, the reason that's particularly concerning to me is the unprecedented rate at which the homicides are being committed. Yes, whites are more likely to be killed by other whites, but they're not being killed at the same rate blacks are. Blacks are dying much quicker.
What? Yes.
Very quicker.
Yesterday in Chicago, 100 people were shot and killed in the city, and that's just in one single day. 100 people. Or no, I'm sorry, that was the weekend. I read it wrong. The whole 4th of July weekend, 100 people were shot and killed within the city.
Yeah, there's big violence around 4th of July. That one, I can't remember the girl. One of her was shot in a drive-by shooting. Chicago's very violent during 4th of July. I actually found that out as I was doing some research.
Yep. Yeah, my uncle's a cop up there, so I always hear about that.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at going to DePaul University, which is in Chicago. So
yeah, that's not too far from me. Yeah, I know about that one. Nice place.
It is. It's a really nice school. But yeah, it's a very violent place around 4th of July. Yeah. And I would argue that these minority communities actually need more policing. And I would argue that would be a better. And in terms of like the drug war,
yes.
I mean, I'm not going to defend. I don't care if weed's illegal personally. I will say this though: part of the reason you see blacks arrested more likely for weed is so often you don't have a lot of times people you get arrested solely for weed. Yeah. Usually, what happens is you get arrested for something else. They search you and then they find weed on you.
Yeah.
So if you got arrested, or if you were arrested for robbery, for example, and they obviously will search you and they find a bag of weed, well, boom, then you get hit with that as well.
They're forced to report it, yeah.
Yeah.
So, exactly. So that would be one of the possible discrepancies in why you're seeing blacks arrested more for something like weed, which, again, I don't care if it's legal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because
I'm not going to defend it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because right now I think the annual for taxpayers that we pay is around 60 or 36 billion for the war on drugs, and that money could be going in other places with better uses.
And then one other thing I want to mention about the war on drugs, you mentioned the Nixon administration. I could be wrong here, because I did hear this from a debate I had back when I was in high school. But I don't believe he actually gave any proof of that. I think she just kind of said it, and
yeah, I believe it was a statement to what Trey was saying.
Yeah. So I mean, you got to kind of take that with a grain of salt. Was Nixon purposely trying to arrest blacks? I mean, one person's statement. I would like some more evidence of that, like a document. I mean, we had, for example, Watergate. Like we knew about that; it leaked. So if we could get something like that leaked and we could see a document or evidence, then I would say, okay, that's a fact, and that's obviously wrong. But I don't know. I wouldn't quite be comfortable jumping to that conclusion at this point.
Hey, Trey?
Yes.
I took some notes on your open. I just have a few questions just to clarify, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So you talked about longer sentences in the justice system. Are you familiar with how those sentences are determined?
What do you mean exactly?
Are you familiar with how sentences are determined in courts of law?
Well, yeah, I mean, it could be their past record, the context of the crime.
And you agree that blacks are likely to commit past crimes, yes?
Excuse me?
And you're willing to concede that blacks are more likely to have a past criminal record, yes?
I mean, some do, some don't.
All right, the professor.
Generally speaking.
Yeah, not like case for case all the time, but as a general rule, yes. So then if blacks are more likely to have committed past crimes, and these past crimes tack on years to the sentence, isn't that kind of a bit of a counterproductive point to your statement that race is driving these longer sentences? Racism?
Well, do you think that black people are just more likely to commit crimes than white people, or are you saying that is there another underlying issue? Because I would argue that there's an underlying issue, and I would say that, well, for one, in the 80s, the cocaine flooding into the inner cities during the Reagan administration, and I would say that there was a lot of poverty going on, a lot of drugs being dumped into these cities, and when this is your environment, we know from study after study, we know this, that when people are put into bad environments, they are more likely to do bad things. I mean, it's fairly simple. Are you saying that just black people are just more prone to crime?
I really don't want to put it like that. I'm willing to fully concede that obviously there's still somewhat of a portion of blacks that are not violent and are peaceful. With this being said, I will say that low IQ individuals are significantly more likely to commit crime. And
Yes.
race and IQ race does not cause IQ, but genetics are the biggest determinant of IQ. It is not education. It is not poverty. Actually, IQ and poverty are somewhat linked. Actually, crime as well. So I would argue that IQ does play a role into both poverty and crime. I would also argue that IQ is not determined by environment as much people will say that it is. If you look at twin studies done, if you put one twin in your sort of lowest socioeconomic class and one in more of your wealthy class, they typically end up in about the same spot IQ-wise. So I would definitely concede that blacks they're in a poor environment more so than whites. I would argue that it's not that they were put there and that's driving them. I'd say that they're there as a result of their IQ and of their culture, which has been going downhill since the civil rights movement, with the welfare state and their destruction of their family. They're actually, if you look at on the BLM website, they actually talk about destroying the pro-nuclear family. It's oppression for some reason for their movement to have two parents in the household. For some reason they're opposed to it. And as for wages and income, I want to touch on that too. The black, if you look at, I actually have some stats on this why I start to go in this. When you put aside the black-white income gap and you look at just college-educated blacks and whites, the results are very different. If you take it back 14 years ago to 2003, black with a bachelor's degree had a median income of $36,694. The median income of whites with the same degree was roughly $2,000 higher. But when you look at black women with a bachelor's degree, the median income was $33,000. White women, it was $30,000. Also, black whites with doctoral degrees as well. Whites with doctoral degree, it was $65K. For blacks, it was $72K. The problem is that most adult blacks don't hold a college degree. Someone adopt life of crime, I would definitely be more than willing to argue. So when you're trying to compare apples and oranges, it's not a good example. It'd be better to actually compare comparable individuals of the same education, marital status, upbringing, environment like socioeconomic class. That'd be a lot better variable than just race. If you see what I'm saying.
If I could add 2 points, kind of the same topic he was going on. Kind of one of the, I guess, privilege you'd have in America would be a 2-parent household. And regardless of what race you are, if you have 2 parents, your poverty rate goes down. For black families that have a mother and father, the poverty rate's only 7%. However, if it's a single parent, the poverty rate goes up over 3 times that. So that's a big indicator. And then also with the wealth gap, you could also, I mean, whites aren't the wealthiest people in the country. Asians actually do very well.
Indian Americans, Taiwans as well, yeah.
Yeah, and Asians get more education than whites. They have better credit scores.
Higher
IQs than whites, exactly. So they're actually, and I mean, you could look at Asian Americans and kind of what they had to suffer through. They were treated very poorly early in American history. To say the least. But
it's kind of a different degree though, but
I would argue it's a different degree. I wouldn't compare it to slavery. No, I wouldn't compare it. Slavery was obviously worse. But they're definitely doing very well. And I wouldn't say there's any sort of institutional racism favoring Asians. I would say that's just kind of the culture they breed. And if you look at Asian countries, they tend to do pretty well with the exception of the communist countries. Vietnam and Red China aren't doing particularly well. China obviously did better when they embraced free market reforms. But like Hong Kong, for example, did really well. And Hong Kong has one of the highest IQs in the world on average. So that's just another thing I kind of wanted to add to his point.
Well, as far as IQ, I mean, there are, I think, near a dozen different types of intelligences. So I don't necessarily think that it has to be specifically IQ as a determining factor or a leading factor. I think there's a bunch of different types of intelligences out there. And I think a lot of people would, I don't have, any study in front of me, or I don't really have a formed opinion on it. But I do believe that there are a lot of people who would argue that IQ tests are culturally biased. I don't really know how I feel about that yet, because I haven't, like I said, I haven't formed an opinion on it.
All IQ tests are just like Western IQ tests.
Excuse me?
All IQ tests are just Western-based IQ tests.
Yeah, I haven't formed an opinion on it, so I've heard it before, so I didn't know.
Well, I'm asking what IQ tests are biased, like the Western WESC-R models, are like.
No, I wouldn't know. I would just kind of bring up a point that I've heard in the past about IQ tests. I'm not. Sure.
They're actually pretty consistent worldwide with different models for the most part. You definitely have the aversion to the mean, standard deviation with IQ tests between different models, but then they're generally the same spot. They're typically within the same 3 to 4 point range for like sub-Saharan Africans, usually about the 70 to 77 mark for the most part. Whites are about 101-ish. Asians are about 106, 107, 108 with their IQ models as well.
Wait, let me ask you a question. Let me kind of go back a little bit, because I heard I can't recall who said it, but I heard one of you guys say that that the number of fatalities when it comes to police interactions are very low. But when you compare that to other countries, we're actually remarkably high. And I'm looking at a chart right here, right now, and it has the United States in comparison to England and Wales. And what it's saying right here is that in England and Wales, in the last 24 years, there's been 55 total police shootings. And
they don't really have guns, though. They don't have guns.
They also have a way smaller population. The United States is far more diverse. They're bigger. There's more guns.
That's a small population, but we have United States that it says, in the last 24 days, there's been 59. So even with the smaller population, there's a disproportionate degree of homicides when it comes to police departments engaging with their citizens.
Wait, you said police shootings, yes?
Correct.
All right.
And also, I think police are restricted heavily on their guns in a lot of areas. And for example, I know France, for example, they're not allowed to have guns. The police officers, they only have special forces. So
and I mean, even if you're comparing per se, take into account that we don't exactly have guns. We have a lot of gun crime. They have just really knives as well. They have a pretty severe gun control. And obviously, if you ban guns, gun crime will fall. But there's still crime with other tools the criminals use. So
and even
apples to oranges again, and it's bad.
And even here in the United States, only 0.009% of all arrests ended in a civilian's death. So even if they are better percent-wise, it sounds like what they're doing, because you mentioned the total death. It sounds like they're just taking the total, which obviously puts the United States at an unfair disadvantage, because we have 350 million. They have maybe 20 million, 40 million. So that, you also have the gun control. Cops don't really carry as many guns like they do here in the United States. And even in the United States, they could be lower rate-wise. I don't think that's what the stat was, but it's not like the United States is having an epidemic. 0.009 isn't an epidemic,
No, not at all.
So that would, obviously you're going to see more cases because there's a big population. We have a lot of big cities here in the United States. Crime's higher in the United States. So I could see how that would happen. I just don't think it's particularly related to policing in the United States being worse than in Wales.
I'm looking at a graph right here, right now, and it's saying that gun ownership, legal gun ownership in England and Wales is at record highs.
What's a record high for them?
Exactly, it's proportional to them, but then again, so is the police departments. I guess the point I'm trying to get at is that, do you think that police officers are too quick to engage fatal occurrences?
Well, there's two ways to look at that. You could look generally, and the stats are saying no, right? Like generally speaking, no. Now, could you find an example of a police, like for example, the shooting in, I think it was South Carolina, where he shot the guy in the back? Yeah, obviously he shouldn't have done that. Or if you look at Eric Garner, that wasn't a shooting, obviously. That was, it was an illegal move. But again, obviously I can look at that and say it's wrong. So yeah, you could find individual cases where cops did something they weren't supposed to do. But generally speaking, if you look generally, the data would say no. Which I wouldn't make my policies based on a hand-picked example. I would do it off general data and evidence that I have. So in that respect, I would say no.
Okay.
And I got a little spot here from the Economic Policy Institute. It's a little breakdown. It's about racial disparities within the workplace. So it right here it says that Black college graduates are twice as likely to be unemployed as college graduates overall. The jobless rate for Black people has almost doubled that
minimum wage law.
Yeah, but hold on. Let me just. There's that of white people for the last 60 years, and people with Black sounding names need to send 50% more job applications than people with white sounding names to get a call back. And like I said, this was from the Economic Policy Institute.
Can I ask how you define Black sounding names or white sounding names?
That's what I was about to. That's kind of, you know.
It's a little I guess gray area.
And then
Trayvon, Jamal. But you actually took the study right out of my mouth right now, Pat. But yeah, it would be traditional Black sounding names. I don't know, Shania, like something like that, I guess.
That seems a little subjective, but going into the employment outside of school, I've seen studies like that. I've had that presented to me before. And what I've found is when I'm not sure the specifics, the one you're giving me. I think I've actually been given this one before, but that one just looked at graduating. It didn't look at, for example, your degree. Blacks disproportionately don't go into STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. It's there are minorities that go there, but African Americans are not one. And those are the highest paying ones. Those one, if you look at it, it's where you're most likely to get a job. Something related with science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. Mm-hmm. So I would also argue the degree plays a role in employment. If you have a degree in, for example, I'll just go ahead and throw out the meme one, gender studies, you're not going to get a job. Yeah. You're not going to get a job. You're going to be unemployed for a while. Compared to if you got something in like computer science or chemistry or something along those lines, engineering.
The study that I'm familiar with, actually looking at the same jobs. So they were applying to the same exact jobs, and
same qualifications though.
Same qualification. It was the same exact resume. The study was actually inspired by somebody who had a Black sounding name, and then they were sending application after application. They weren't getting any call back, and then one day they got the idea to make their name sound, more of like a white name, and they were actually called back within 24 hours, and it was the same exact resume. And so
this was done for how many businesses exactly was this study based on?
Yeah, I was about to say,
county, what state?
How many businesses was the study using? I don't have the actual full study in front of me. So
that's one thing that'll be subjective is the businesses might have a different demand for employers regardless of your race. I can tell you, for example, I grew up in South Florida and it didn't have the best economy. I couldn't find a job forever over there. It was so bad. And I mean, I have an incredibly white sounding name. I know that's anecdotal, but I knew the unemployment rate was very high in that area. So, I mean, it depends where they're applying to. Do they have a demand for workers? What time of the year did they do it? I'm assuming they didn't give it to them the exact same day. They might be a little suspicious that they're like, wow, John and Jermone went to the exact same college, got the exact same degree at the exact same time with the exact same GPA. Presumably they would do it, they would space it out, which depending on the season or the time or the economy, that could obviously affect your employment rate.
Yeah, and this is, I guess, the heart of the debate because there is nothing black and white about it. You know, there is so much subjectiveness. There's so much gray area. For every one study you can point out, I can point out one study. And this is really why the debate continues. And I don't feel like, I feel obviously I have my position, you guys have your positions, but I don't understand necessarily, even if you guys think that, well, I guess you don't believe that police are engaging in fatal shootings at an alarming rate. I would happen. It is alarming when you look at the totality of how many interactions they have, but I think it's far too high. And I think that's what should be the message. We need to get that number down. And I think that when it comes to black people committing more crimes, obviously, like I stated before, I think it's more poverty driven or an environment and not necessarily race. So I think if you want to work on crime, I think we have to work on what are the causes of crime. And that's going to be obviously another debate.
I have a few questions then. Once you're done, Brian, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, a few things I want to point out. You mentioned the alarming crime rate. I mean, I think it's great. Obviously, if there's an unjust police killing, I'm obviously going to be opposed to that, and that's a terrible tragedy. I feel it's skating the line of a nirvana fallacy in the sense that you're going to have some violent interactions, and currently we're less than 0.01% of every interaction with a civilian or arrest leads to death. So yeah, it would be cool if it could go even lower. I think it's a bit extreme to say it's alarming. And then also for the economics, I don't know if Isaiah was going down the same path as me, but I would somewhat agree with you in a way in terms of the economy impacting it. But my two big things would be education and a lot of the economics, such as the minimum wage, for example, which the way I see it is, if you look at our public school system, it's not very good. It's actually pretty bad, particularly in inner cities where you have high minorities. So minorities are getting bad education. And then we have politicians raising the price floor above the market equilibrium. Yeah, above the market equilibrium price, which essentially forces employers to discriminate against employees whose productivity does not justify a minimum wage. And when you deny a good education to somebody, well, then yeah, I would say they are at a disadvantage. I would say that affects blacks more than whites in that sense.
Oh, you all set, Brian?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Trey, you talked about how you could easily cite one study to contradict our view and vice versa, but that doesn't mean that we can't look at the methodology of the studies. And so with that, I ask you, for the studies that you're citing as evidence for your side, do they adjust racial disparities on officers in the homicide rate? Do they account for both of those variables?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch all of that.
All right. So for the studies you cite and their methodology, do they account for the homicide rate and the officer feloniously killed racial disparities? Do they adjust for those?
Not. I wouldn't be able to tell you that. I'm not sure.
Okay. And for the for poverty, for the cops killing as well, I definitely agree that I want them to be lowered, but they're not an epidemic. Even when Obama came out last year saying that there's about one black man every few weeks, that's 26 men a year. That's not an epidemic by any means. And at least with Sterling and Flonder, they were at least justified in a sense. And as for poverty, I have what solution are you proposing? What do you think will ail the poverty in the black community? Like what policies exactly?
Well, I believe the two that come to mind for me would be a higher federal minimum wage, and the one that I guess is really the heart of it, because I hear a lot of people say that they don't want to raise the minimum wage, and to some degree, I don't agree with that, but I guess I understand where they're coming from. But I think the main one is education. So I would argue that free public tuition to college would make that so much easier, because I work in the inner cities and I see these kids from the ground up, and they do not believe they have the means to go to college. and that starts at a very young age, and they don't take high school as seriously as people who know that they're going to college. You know, growing up, I knew that I could get to college, and a lot of these people they don't believe that. And if they can't get to college with their grades, they don't believe that they can afford it. And obviously, I think we can all agree that college tuition is outrageous right now. So I think that the times are changing from the days where college tuition actually used to be free for a period of time, but the times are changing from when K through 12 could, have one single parent income support the whole family. I would argue that, minimum we need to give a community college or some kind of trade school at the very least, because I think that we need to give them a route and opportunity. I don't believe in equity of outcome. I believe in equity of opportunity. And I want to see everybody be educated and be able to go out and support themselves.
Okay. Isaiah, do you want to go first with that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I have a couple of issues with that, actually. In the case
go ahead, then I'll go.
Of the minimum wage, just out of your personal conjecture and what you've seen in statistics for these studies, how high would you want to raise the minimum wage?
I believe in 15.
Why not 50?
I believe that's disproportionate, and I think that's kind of a,
If we raised it to 50, what would happen if we raised it to 50?
I don't, like I said, I think you have to be proportionate, and I think if you look at the history of the minimum wage and productivity in this country, you see that 7.25, it just is not cutting it.
Well, I actually have some studies if I could share with you regarding the minimum wage. Is it okay if I read through them?
And I'll respond afterwards, just to your other points.
Okay, so I have a Congressional Budget Office that reports a minimum wage increase from, this is $7.25 to just $10.10, would result in a loss of 500,000 jobs. I have a survey of 1,213 business and human resources professionals. 38% of employers who are currently paying minimum wage said they would lay off some of their employees if the minimum wage was raised to $10.10. 54% said they would decrease hiring levels. San Francisco Office of Economic Analysts said that an increase to $15 would reduce the city's employment by about 15,270 private sector jobs. In 2014, Stevie H. Hankey, who has a PhD and is a professor of applied economics at Johns Hopkins University, he surveyed 21 European countries that have a minimum wage and found that the average unemployment rate of 11.8% was about a third higher than the 7.9 average unemployment rate in the 7 EU countries that had no minimum wage. 60% of small business owners said that raising the minimum wage will hurt most small business owners, according to a 2013 Gallup poll. Jamie Richardson, who is a vice president of the fast food chain White Castle, said the company would be forced to close almost half its stores and let go of thousands of workers if the federal minimum wage were raised to $15. A 2013 article by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago stated that if the minimum wage is increased, fast food restaurants would pass on almost 100% of their increased labor costs on the consumer, and other firms maybe do the same. The price of a cup of coffee went up 10 to 20% in Oakland, California after a 36% minimum wage hike to $12.25 an hour. A 2015 Purdue University study found that raising the minimum wage fast food restaurants would result in a price increase of 4.3% to 25%, or a reduction in product size 12% to 70%. So your hamburger would be smaller, your drink would be smaller, whatever. Minimum wage workers are disproportionately young, according to a Pew Research Center. 16 to 24-year-olds make up 50.4% of the minimum wage earners, despite representing only 13.7% of the workforce as a whole. 24% of minimum wage earners are teenagers. Matthew Rizal, who has a PhD of applied economics at Susquehanna University, wrote in a 2014 article that the federal minimum wage has, quote, devastating impact on teenagers because firms will not pay many young workers with no experience or skills minimum wage, let alone a higher wage. I also have the Statistical Brain Research Institute, which found 2,382,000 U.S. jobs were outsourced in 2015, with 44% of companies saying they did so to reduce cost. A 2014 study of 400 U.S. chief financial officers by Dr. Campbell Harver and J. Paul Snitzer, a professor of international business at Duke University, found that 70% of CEOs would increase contracting outside or moving actual production outside the United States if the minimum wage was raised to just $10 an hour. So $15 an hour, you're going to have even more problems. So I would argue the minimum wage impact would not only hurt African Americans and the youth, it would really hurt the entire country as a whole. I'm sorry, did you want to say something, Isaiah, or was...
Sure, I'll kind of wrap it up. So, there's definitely studies that obviously Trey and Patrick can cite that show that it doesn't decrease, or excuse me, doesn't increase employment. But I definitely as far as the studies that I've seen for this and their methodologies, they don't exactly account for they don't really distinguish between low-skilled and high-skilled workers. And that's sort of why the unemployment rate doesn't really exactly increase. I would also argue that the minimum wage definitely has not helped the Black community. In 1948, the Black unemployment rate for 16 and 17-year-olds was 9.4%. And for white males, the exact same age was 10.2%.
You said 1948, though, right?
Yes, from 1971 to 1994, the Black unemployment rate for teenagers was never less than 3 times what it was in 1948. And it ranged as high as more than 5 times 1948 level. And I don't think that America is more racist now than it was in 1948 and prior to that. Do you agree with that statement?
Yep.
Yeah.
So then what's driving this unemployment rate now that we're seeing? What's this disparity caused by?
What is this disparity caused by for the unemployment rate?
Yeah, between 1948 and then like today, in now's time. Yes.
I also have a question about the free college. You guys are Bernie supporters, correct?
Yeah.
Oh no.
So
no,
you
Brian.
would. I'm sorry. So you guys would probably subscribe to his plan for free college tuition, right?
I believe in local free tuition. I don't believe in universities.
Okay, that's a little different than Bernie's. His was the federal government pays 2/3 of all, basically foots 2/3 of all of it. And then the states pick up the other third. However, I was doing some research because I'm actually writing a book about Bernie. And one of the issues with that is the fact that where college tuition is higher is where students would benefit the most. So like Vermont, for example, where college tuition is very high, they would actually get more than someone in, for example, North Carolina, where college tuition is lower. So the argument is you would never actually get that to pass Congress because you would want representatives to basically screw over their states. So I don't see how that would really pass.
Yeah.
And then I would also argue, well, I'll ask you guys a question for the free college tuition. What happens if you make something free?
What do you, I mean,
you'll see an influx, yeah.
Yeah.
You would see the demand increase, correct?
Yeah, increase in demand.
What happens when the demand's increased?
Resources get spread thin. I mean...
Well, think about it this way. If everyone wanted what you had, let's say you had a pencil that everyone wanted, could you charge more for that pencil?
No. See, are you going into talking about the competition of schools right now? Is that where we're going?
So
then I wasn't catching on.
So when you make something free, you increase the demand.
Yeah.
When you increase the demand for something, you also increase the prices. If I had one pencil that everyone just for whatever reason wanted, I could charge a lot of money for that pencil. Couldn't I?
Yeah.
Everyone wants it, so I have more say over who gets it. So if you made college tuition free, you would logically increase the demand, because if the price is lower, the demand goes up. If you increase the demand, you increase cost. So college tuition is actually getting more expensive.
Well, yeah, I mean, there has to be some kind of. We have to figure out a way to get costs down for college.
Well, we gotta cut our military budget, and it's time for us to start investing at home in our country instead of investing overseas and leveling third world countries and people living in caves and so what. That's something we got to get out of. So I mean, we have the money. These things are doable. It's just where our money is currently isn't going to allow that to happen, and therefore we are going to have to find another place and create more taxes to cover these costs.
I have an issue with that statement, though.
Yeah.
Because I agree that the tax rate is kind of high in this country, and I definitely am more of a white interventionist. But with that being said, are you familiar with the law of diminishing returns?
No.
It basically says that the more economic inputs you put in, the more the output decreases. This is what we're seeing in healthcare. For example, why healthcare costs are skyrocketing while the quality is plummeting with government finance. And you're complaining about the cost, but you don't recognize why that cost rose so high in the first place. It wasn't because of greedy college boards skyrocketing the price of tuition. It was because the state stepped in and decided to add all this financial aid. More people started going to college, and therefore taxes rose to cover the greater strain on resources because they're scarce and so on and so forth. So as Brian was saying, when you increase the demand artificially, you definitely have a greater strain on resources. And something is going to have to ration because you got something going to have to ration. So it comes down to if you want the college boards to start handpicking their students, even more than they are now, so it's happening in Germany, or if you want to have price rationing to say who goes where.
And also, even if you did cut the military spending, that's not really going to do anything with the cost of college. The cost of college would still go up even if you get 100% of it. Which, I mean, the military spending in foreign policy, that's somewhat of a different debate. And I don't know if it's 100% relevant. But even if you did cut spending there, that doesn't really address the issue of increased costs, which is one of my concerns with Bernie Sanders' plan.
But how does the state actually lower any cost of anything without some harm? I'm interested in hearing that answer.
Without some harm?
Yeah, without some kind of harm from price controls.
Well, I mean, there really isn't any way to not go about it without. That's an argument that's really not. I mean, anyone that's gonna try and argue that one, I'd even disagree with.
So then, why not add more competition and start privatizing education?
I mean, we do see privatization of the college, and I just went through college, and private schools are a lot more than the public ones.
Well, I mean, with the private school, just because you're private, they shouldn't, but they still get, for example, federal grants. They get financial aid, for example. Like you still receive those. In fact, they actually get more proportional than the public schools do. Yeah. So I actually get more from that. I mean, I guess one thing, just arguing for your side a little bit, is colleges spending so much on their campuses, they charge more for that reason. But going about that, I would actually argue giving them a free ticket makes it worse, because if you give government loans, or if you give, in this case, an entirely free ride, isn't the school going to get their check regardless? Yeah. Like if the government's footing it. So what incentive would the colleges have to decrease spending if they know they're going to get their check regardless of what they charge?
No, yeah, I agree. I think we have to figure out a way to get the cost down of college tuition, because obviously right now the costs are skyrocketing because there is a supply and demand, because people know that they need a college education in order to go out and have a good career. I mean, a college graduate is going to make, I think, on average, like $1.2 million more than a high school graduate. So they see that, they know that, and they have a death grip on it. They have a death grip where they know they can do this and charge outrageous prices. Yeah, and then you look at the CEOs, or not CEOs, but the deans of these schools and their salaries and what they're paying, not what they're paying, but and then what we're paying. I mean, it's not proportion, and I think there has to be a way we can drive costs down, and I think it's interesting. Go ahead.
If students somewhat didn't have this check from the government, wouldn't the schools essentially be forced to renegotiate their prices?
Yeah.
So I would say that's one way.
But I think that when you take away federal student aid, you might drive down costs, then obviously you might not. But let's say you do, you're still taking away federal aid from people who would still need it in any case.
Yep.
Well, I would say with federal aid in college, you have to be very careful with who you're investing in. What is that money going to? Are they majoring in something ridiculous? Or and most truly talented people that you want to invest in, they get a pretty decent amount of scholarships, or they can work out other deals. NV Energy was really big for me. I don't know if you know NV Energy. They're an energy company here in Nevada. They've done a lot for me with my college. And then with DePaul University, I've actually talked with them. They're offering me the ability to, I would be a professor's assistant, and they completely waive tuition. And DePaul's a private school. They would completely waive tuition, and they would still pay me. So there are ways to go about it. And I would argue if you can bring the price down even more, you would only further help those students.
I mean, it's hard to say, because let's say you're talking, $50,000 for tuition, and you're going to get, a sizable chunk in federal aid for that, or you can bring down the cost to $22,000 and get zero aid, and you're still not going to. How are you going to come up with $22,000?
Well, I mean, just DePaul's not quite 50. That's probably a little closer to Harvard, but DePaul's like 35, 40,000 a semester. And
I was just trying to use a nice even number.
Gotcha. But I mean, DePaul's another example. And as for financial aid, I mean, hypothetically, if there was no way, I would be for investing in very limited people. For example, if you had like an Einstein or a Tesla, that you could make a decent argument for. But the issue with that is government isn't good at doing that. They just kind of blindly throw money at a grand amount of people. Some of them will never use their degree. I think it's like 40% of college grads get a job that doesn't require their degree. So we didn't really invest for almost half of our college grads. If they major in something irrelevant, that's not really helping society.
Yeah, I mean, I could see the conversation being, a reasonable conversation of saying, college is going to cost money, but, STEM programs are where you can get, free.
That's where you make your money, yeah. Well, and with that, I mean, I would be more in favor, if you're going to do it some way, to have some sort of, almost like an IQ test or a college entrance exam. And if you scored absolutely off the charts, I would be willing to reconsider it, because they would contribute to your society. But that's not really the way that it's been working recently. It's been subsidized to all hell. The prices have gone up tremendously, and we're just kind of blankly throwing the money out and hoping it gets to somewhere that needs it. We're throwing breadcrumbs out and hoping we hit the people we need to. I don't think that's an effective means of handling this.
Well, I know, for instance, from the GI Bill, for every dollar they spent in investing in veterans' education, they were able to see $7 in return into the economy. So I think it's a good investment. I do obviously, would agree that, I don't want to pay for someone's tuition in basket weaving,
Right.
So, I get that argument too. But I think that, if you don't want to raise the minimum wage, okay, all right, I hear you. But I think you have to invest somewhere. And I think higher education, I mean, I hear conservatives all the time talk about bootstraps. And I think that's a good way of saying, hey, you don't finish your degree, you're going to owe us this money. If you do, you know what? Have at it and go after the American dream. So,
well, what if they don't have the money to pay it back?
And then it's the same,
They would just be in debt, which is kind of what they're in now.
Yeah, exactly. It would be the same. It would be no different. We have $1.2 trillion in student loan debt, currently.
So I don't think that would really help the situation. Like, I wouldn't want to throw people in jail over their student loan debts, but like,
no, of course not. But
like,
I think most people would try to finish their degree knowing that.
Well, they already do. Like, when you sign up for a loan, you have to pay it back.
Yeah.
Presumably.
In student loans, you can't declare bankruptcy for. So you will owe that money no matter what.
Well, they do student loan forgiveness. They do student loan forgiveness.
Like 10 years in the public sector or something like that, or community service.
Something like that. Like, my grandmother had student debt for a while. They ended up just forgiving her. But The point I'm making is I don't see that system being any different. We would be in the same problem we are now, if that makes sense. I don't see how we could really implement such a policy, and I don't think it would be particularly effective. I think it would ultimately cause the cost of college to go up. Ultimately, we're going to have to pay it, and it's going to be a compounding increase. As the population grows, you're going to have to pay more, and the price of that free college is going to go up more and more and more, to the point where it's just it'll be quite a pricey bill. I would argue within 50 years, it could be one of the biggest chunks of our federal budget. Entitlements already are our biggest budget if you add all the entitlements together. But I would argue if you put free college in with the notion that you're increasing the demand, you're increasing the cost, that I think would be a substantial chunk of the budget. A very worrisome amount.
You're putting Social Security and Medicaid into the entitlement bracket. I don't necessarily consider, Social Security an entitlement since we're paying into it. But
I would consider it a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, I kind of figured, but I think I'd argue. I think that it's undeniable that even if you would want to call it a Ponzi scheme, that the Social Security safety net has greatly reduced elderly poverty. But my phone is on 4%, so I don't want it to die.
Gotcha. I actually have some studies on Social Security I can go over real quick. I have a ton of stats here. It's actually another part of it. Due to aging population and low birth rates, the ratio of workers to retirees is shrinking, thereby reducing the funds available in future retirees. In 1940, the payroll tax contribution of 159 workers paid for the benefit of just one recipient. In 2013, the estimate ratio was 2.8 workers for each recipient. And since 2010, Social Security has been paying out more in benefits than it receives in worker contribution. According to the 2015 Social Security Trustees Report, the trust funds will run out of money by 2034. And essentially, if you use this existing funds, you're going to run out of money. But if we switch to a more personal private account, you could actually see more growth. The year-over-year growth rate for private investment was 6.38% average real return on an investment between 1984 and 2014. And that's much, much higher than the Social Security program of 2.67% that we saw as of 2014. So here, according to Martin Finstein, a private account earnings a modest 5.5% real rate of return. Someone with $50,000 of real annual earnings during their work years could accumulate enough to pay out of $22,000 after the age of 67, essentially doubling the current Social Security benefits. So I would argue if we privatized it and allowed investment in stocks, not only would our stocks be incredible, Wall Street would be booming, you would actually have recipients receiving, according to this study, twice more than they do now. So I would argue the elderly would actually have more money. I would also argue there's more freedom. Like, for example, if you die, if I've paid into Social Security, if I were to die right now, it stays in the pile. To where with a private security or with a private Social Security or investment, I can actually put that in my will. So if I were to die, whatever I have gets sent to my family. It's like where I work. If I were to die before they sent me my paycheck, they would send my paycheck to my mother, for example. So that's another benefit is with the private security. If grandpa were to die before he was able to reap the rewards, it would go to maybe his grandson. And then I know Chile did an example of privatized Social Security that did really good. It doubled the country's historical growth rate. It was equivalent to about 40% of the GNP. So, I mean, Chile did an example of it. It was pretty successful.
Wow.
I'm not so convinced that I guess at the rate, I think you would see more elderly poverty. I want to get into this, but my phone's gonna die like any second.
Would you argue the real rate of return is higher for Social Securities than investment?
Excuse me?
Would you argue the real rate of return would be higher with Social Security than in a private investment. That just seems like kind of a logical conclusion.
I didn't catch what you're saying, man. I can't hear you.
Would the average rate of return be higher for Social Security than for a private investment?
Oh, I wouldn't know.
That would somewhat imply that they would do better. They would return more from Social Security than they would in an investment, right?
Again.
Yep.
Yeah, I would argue, according to these studies here, you actually receive more through a private investment, whether it be stock or whatever. You actually receive more money that way than you would with Social Security, which, like I said, is going to be out of money by 2034. It was a terrible system that FDR came up with. It essentially was a Ponzi scheme. I hate paying into it. But yeah, I think from a moral aspect, it's wrong, but more importantly, from an empirical aspect, it has a lot of flaws. Anything you want to add to that, Isaiah?
No, I actually am not. I haven't actually worked at privatizing the Social Security. I'm not really too familiar with it, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say I basically feel the same way in terms of the Social Security. So we're on the same page with that.
Well, do you guys want to go ahead and just give? I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about. If you want to go into your closing statements.
Yeah, I was gonna say if Trey wants to wrap up on his end since his phone was gonna die, and then I'll follow up after him and give mine.
I'm not gonna be able to complete anything, man. I'm on 1%.
I gotcha. Well, it was nice having you on. If there's anything you want to say before you die, go ahead. If you want to plug your Instagram.
Oh, we dot the resistance. The resistance. Excuse me.
Okay.
And had a good time. I look forward to maybe doing it again. You guys give me some things to think about, and hope that we give you some things to think about as well. And yeah, hope to do it again.
It was a pleasure. Pat, would you like to do the closing statements then, since his phone is?
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, I'm Patrick the Progressive. I'm the founder of the Burning Media Network. That's follow us on Instagram. We have a Facebook page and Twitter. So just make sure to check us out there. We are more of a left-leaning progressive network, obviously, but we do go off on both ends, established Democrats, established Republicans, anything establishment we will go after. So that's basically all we have, and it's been a good time doing another debate with you.
Definitely fun. Isaiah, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I'm Isaiah. I'm austrianomoics on Instagram. It's tough to say, but it's austrianomoics. I should have a debate coming up for you too. Actually, one on minimum wage of 5 versus 5, and a upcoming ANCAP debate 4 versus 4 from the proprietarian side of the status. It'll be me, Brian, Jared, and the proprietarian against a couple of left-party ANCAPs. Those should be some point this week or next week. It'll be pretty good. And stay tuned for more.
Awesome. And I'm Brian. I run the account Capitalist2_ American. Be sure to give me a follow there. And I do debates. At this point, I kind of do it wherever. I have my YouTube channel, but I can't really host a debate due to my Wi-Fi situation. So my friend here usually does. It's a lot of fun. I enjoyed talking about it, covering the topics of Black Lives Matter, Social Security, college tuition, minimum wage, and all that fun stuff. Always fun to hit on that. So definitely a good time.
Okay, before you guys leave, I'm gonna read some comments.
All right, that's fair.
My phone was like woke as fuck. Comrade Heck said capitalistic American is a complete moron. Oh wow.
Okay, he blocked me. Tell him to unblock me. He's the idiot.
He blocked you.
Hecko's the dude. He's the guy. He tried to tell me that people didn't die under Stalin, and he sent me a fucking Tumblr post. He sent me a Tumblr. He sent me a Tumblr post as a source. He's like, "Oh, that's just capitalist propaganda." I'm like, "Okay, where's your source?"
That's what it always is.
Yeah.
And he tried to send me like 12, I guess, hoping I would get overwhelmed. I went through each one, And then like the third one was a Tumblr post. I'm like, I'm not even opening a Tumblr post. Cite that on a college essay. See if that counts. Like,
put that source in.
He's an idiot.
Hey,
man.
at least you didn't get someone citing you fucking InfoWars once.
Yeah, I don't know. I might take InfoWars over Tumblr. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I would honestly. Shit. Let's be honest.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. He was like, "Oh wow, Black Lives Matter doesn't like racist American pigs with, and of course America with
Jesus.
3 Ks."
How
That's
gold.
how evil.
Yeah, I think he's like 12 though.
Capitalistic American, open your eyes, you complete moron.
Jesus.
It's in a sound debate. What?
Yeah, he doesn't like me very much. He blocks me on Instagram, and then he likes to comment on some of my debates. It's funny.
Hey, dimwit. Capitalistic American. Check out this site, prisoncensorship.info.
Is it Tumblr?
And then, you know how you guys were talking about Nixon and all that? He was like, yes, Nixon was trying to purposely arrest innocents. It's America again with 3 Ks.
Who said that? Hector?
Hector or something, yeah. I think he's a Maoist.
Comrade Hector.
Comrade.
And then he's like,
well, we can start together in friendship.
Then he was like, capitalistic America with 3 Ks, and then he said America with 3 Ks, and then Art Mass says, I love you, capitalistic American.
Oh, at least I have one fan in there.
And then Eastern Marxist said, what happened to Hulk?
Hulk he's still around. He's been busy.
He's just less active. He was.
Yeah, I was gonna say because he wanted to do a debate with me a few times, and I always said I'd be up for one.
Yeah, no, definitely. If you had any more politicians, we could do something like that. That
would I got plenty. I can hook you up with a few and get another debate.
It makes me feel important.
Yeah, no, I always love getting that one. No, dude, that Kyle that you went against on my one debate, that kid was awful. Like, I just had my mic muted during that. I was like, this is the worst progressive I've had on one of these things, man. It's like, what?
I watched it for like the first 20 minutes. Brian, I had to turn it off. Honestly, it was too much.
Like, the dude was like, he didn't have any facts in front of him. And he sounded like he was eating a cup of noodles during the fucking debate. I was like, what are you doing, man?
Then artist said,
you idiot.
He's a nice guy.
Said,
oh, yeah, he's a nice
I'm
guy.
Your biggest fan. Brian.
What's up?
Art Mass is your biggest fan.
Who?
Art Mass.
Oh, thank you, Art Mass. I appreciate that.
He's like try to get Ben Shapiro on your show. Might be hard. LOL.
Yeah,
I've been trying to get him here.
Yeah, I was actually going to debate him on some topics at some point. I don't know. That would be the pinnacle. I mean, I would really challenge me debating Shapiro, but I don't know. It would be a good challenge, I guess. Hopefully, I'll have co-hosts, but I don't know if that'll be a challenge.
Speaking of which, we're gonna end this. Stay on my channel. You three are allowed to be on it if you guys want, because it will be more of a chill stream. Brian, you've been on it. You know how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, make sure you subscribe to his YouTube channel so you can catch all his podcasts and everything like that.
Oh, hey, hold up! I was about to say something. I just got 300 subs. Thank you, whoever subbed me.
Pause.
It would be awesome if you guys give me shout outs on YouTube. I mean,
you'll definitely get one when I post the video. I'll post this on Instagram.
Yeah, I was gonna say, once you post it or anything, just shoot me the link and I'll get some things to post.
I'll put it in. Since you know how to work it, I'll repost it. It's already in the chat.
Okay, awesome.
All right.
I don't know your chat to work right now.
I'll actually go post that right now for you.
Awesome.
I'll go take care of that, and hopefully we can have another
Also, if you're still here, Art, go check out the link in the description where Brian debated a fucking oh god, yeah, the flat earthers. Oh,
Yeah,
and we
that
could
was
talk about that. So, Pat, if you want to be in my podcast that I'm about to start in a bit, you can join since I have your info for Hangout.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say because I'd love to see this flat Earth debate because that's always a good one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's on his channel. It was the other day, so it
Yeah.
should be up if you want to watch it.
Yeah, I'll probably
Yeah.
watch it after this because I had this dude I worked with, and of course he was only the janitor, so I mean it only made sense that he was the flat earther. So, dude's like 43 and he's a janitor. It's like, what are you doing, man?
Who would have thought he wasn't the CEO?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Who thought he wasn't the
Oh
one
yeah,
who
guys,
joined?
if you guys want to help me out with the video, I already told Brian and I told Isaiah, right, that I'm making a video. That I'm making a video about flat earthers. It's gonna be a stupid video, but it's gonna be full of memes and shit because I don't take flat earthers seriously. If you want to help me out, like find videos and send me links.
All right, sounds fair.
I know, Pat. I follow you on Instagram, and I also follow you, Isaiah.
All right.
I'm in the group chat. You can follow me. And then
Send
we
me
can
some links
talk.
before I find some
Yeah,
tomorrow or something.
All right.
Awesome. I'll definitely go to posting this right when it's officially up. It takes like 2 seconds to get up, so it'll be up in like 5 minutes. And I'll make a post about it tonight while it's still not too late.
Yeah,
So-
And then we
sounds
can,
good to me.
and then I'll just start up the pod. I'll message you guys in the chat. Hold on, I'm gonna message it right now. So I'm gonna message it on here. The link to the podcast so you guys can join. I just messaged it.
All
I
right.
got to join Dylan's podcast really quick for a little bit, but I'll try to hop in after that.
All right.
So,
Because
I'll
Brian,
be-
you know how long we fucking stream, so.
Yeah. All right, man. I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Later,
See you
Pat.
guys.
Let's do it.